Well, here we are talking about Isaiah chapter 23. Oh man, this chapter is going to be a fun one to read. A lot of good things to learn about the ancient world from this chapter. This is a prophecy that is given to a nation called Tyre in the Old Testament, Tyre. And we're going to learn a little bit about this nation a little more as we get into this. Now, remember, this nation, if you go back to, well, they're mentioned a little bit in Psalms, but if you get into go back, man, where was that? Chronicles, I think. Either it was either Second Kings or Second Chronicles. It talks about the King Solomon, and when he took over the reign, remember he brought in all kinds of wood, exotic materials to build the temple and build his palace with. And Tyre is mentioned a lot in those chapters dealing with King Solomon because Tyre was more of a coastal city. It had access to lots of trade routes. So he got a lot of wood shipped through Tyre into Jerusalem. Solomon made a deal between Israel and Tyre to do like a trade partnership kind of idea to import a lot of goods through them. So Tyre is an economic powerhouse location, basically, a big economic hub in the ancient world. So this is a revelation to Tyre. Now this, again, because of the duality of Jewish scripture, and especially in Isaiah, we have these ideas of something from the ancient world is what we're going to talk about, but there is a metaphorical message or a spiritual message for the latter days. So what happened in the ancient world is going to happen in a certain way in the last days, basically. That's a lot of what Isaiah talks about is this. He talks about things that are happening in the ancient world and predicts a lot of destructions and problems in the ancient world. Those are going to happen again. And that's going to be the last days, like getting close to that wind up scene when the Savior comes. Basically, the second coming happens. So that we're going to get that in today's chapters as well. Now, if you look at chapter 23 and you want to find something that, as we read this, you'll see a lot of correlations. It's almost a little scary. But also look at Revelations chapter 18. These two, Isaiah 23 and Revelations 18, are kind of the same, basically. Revelations 23, or Isaiah 23, is about a revelation to the nation of Tyre, but Revelations 18 is talking about how the saints are to be called out of Babylon. And so they need the saints to stop enjoying Babylon and the world. And I think that's actually, in a way, what we're having right now when President Nelson is telling everybody we need to be more on purpose in following the gospel. We can't casually follow the gospel anymore. We need to be on purpose with it. That means we have to make more choices of, do we do what the world is doing or do we do what God is doing? And so those choices are more apparent and clear and obvious now than it ever has been, where we have to decide, do we follow God or do we follow the world? So I believe that's this calling out from the world that's happening. Also in chapter 18 of Revelations, as the header talks about, that Babylon falls and is lamented by her supporters. Now, if you notice, anytime we have this idea of scattering or the moving of saints from one area, the saints settle in an area, it gets really wicked, the saints decide it's time to move out of that area to go out some other, usually it's been a physical location where they can move from one nation to another location to get out of and away from all this wickedness and persecution and troubles. Then oftentimes these areas collapse, have all kinds of major problems. We are going, I think, in a metaphorical sense, we're going to see more of that as the saints decide we need to do more with God and do less with the world. That's going to happen, and we're in the process of that happening. So it's probably not very far long before Babylon collapses and falls apart. So Revelations 18 is connected with Isaiah 23. So let's jump into Isaiah 23 to learn more. Now, verse 1, the burden of Tyre. Howl, ye ships of Tarshish, for it is laid waste, so that there is no house, no entering in. From the land of Chittim it is revealed to them. So Tyre, now let's talk about this. We talked about Tyre, okay, so Tarshish, the ships of Tarshish. Tarshish may have been Tartessus in Spain. It's a sister merchant nation to or city to Tyre in shipping and trade. So as we look at this, so Tyre is on the coastal areas, I believe towards more the northern area of Israel, almost into like Syria, Lebanon area. But they're along that eastern coast of the Mediterranean. And then Tarshish, they believe, could be that Tartessus, which is from Spain. So now we have this established shipping opportunity to go all the way across the Mediterranean. Chittim was an early name for present-day Cyprus. So that's getting up into Lebanon and other areas as well. Actually, I think, Tyre, I think was actually more to the southern. No, well, so you have Israel, and then you have like Lebanon and Syria and stuff above them, and then down below is Egypt, and then past Egypt is more like ancient Phoenician areas. But that's where I can't remember. I think Tyre was along the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, not northern Africa, but more western end of the Middle East, basically. But anyways, these are cities that have a lot of commerce and trade, so they constitute this idea of global commerce, of at least the known world at the time commerce. Lots of trade, lots of activity, lots of economic function and factors and value happening, basically. And this revelation says they are going to be obliterated. So economic destruction is coming to this area. And it does. With the Assyrians and the Babylonians, a lot of things collapse and are changed over. So verse 2, be still, ye inhabitants of the isle, thou whom the merchants of Zidon that pass over the sea have replenished. Now Sidon was the older city of the Phoenicians, so that's northern Africa, whereas Tyre was the newer site that had gained supremacy during the Assyrian era. Sidon received her revenue from grain of Sihor, which is from the Nile waters of Egypt. So renowned had the merchants become that they were honored by their national associates as great ones. So if you look at Revelations 18:23, you get this same kind of an idea that he says in here in 18:23, "And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. Voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee, for thy merchants were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived." So as we look at this, the problem is economic growth is going to happen. People are going to believe money is the ruling factor. Money is the motivation of why we do everything. So we focus on profit on everything we do, and we fall into this false dichotomy or false assumption that because we are busy making money, we are doing what's right. And that's going to be the problem, and then everything collapses and falls apart. And as it says in there, like in 18:23, the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. So the gospel is not being taught, basically, and they will fall. So this is a good thing for us to think about. When the gospel ceases to be taught in areas, they're kind of left on their own, and they have lots of collapse and problems. So nations where the gospel does get taught, they tend to do better and have more prosperity. So it's kind of a underlying factor you could look at that most economists would never look at, but it does, as the gospel emerges and goes through these different countries, we see changes in prosperity to happen. And how they relate to the gospel almost one-to-one correlates with how successful and prosperous their country is. It's really fascinating how that works out. All right, so verse 3, as we're getting into this, Now, and it says, and by great waters, the seed of Sihor, the harvest of the river, is her revenue, and she is a mart of nations, or a market, basically is what that means. So again, Tyre is this huge economic center that happens, and they're trading with other people along the Mediterranean. There's lots of shipping, lots of commerce. This is the culmination of wealth of nations, of these lots of prosperity and finances that are happening. Verse 4, be thou ashamed, O Zidon, for the sea has spoken, even the strength of the sea, saying, I travail not, nor bring forth children, neither do I nourish up young men, nor bring up virgins. So this is taking this idea, using using a woman's perspective. You think about travail not, the sea travails not, is not bringing forth children, is not nourishing young men or virgins, meaning young girls, basically, as we learned in an earlier part of Isaiah. So the sea is taking this position of taking a female persona on itself to go through this and realize I'm not propagating things, I'm not furthering the success. So what this is telling us, again, is economic collapse. Okay, it's done. The trade routes are gone, basically. They're not running. Why would this economic collapse happen? Possibly war is a very common thing with the Assyrian armies coming in and marching over the whole areas. That's going to completely change how trade and commerce happens. Old ways will be destroyed, and new establishments will be set up in other locations. So war is a very common one. Could be there's some natural disasters that are contributing to this, but the economy is going to collapse. Things are going to collapse and not be the way it used to be, basically. Verse 5, as at the report concerning Egypt, so shall they be sorely pained at the report of Tyre. So when Egypt discovers that Tyre has been destroyed, they're going to be really sad and upset. Probably because of the economic trade that Egypt enjoyed through Tyre is going to be completely disrupted. And that means, of course, the Assyrian army is occupying a lot of territory and is really making it hard for Egypt to be prosperous. Verse 6, pass ye over to Tarshish. Howl, ye inhabitants of the isle. So they're not going to be happy. A lot of mourning, a lot of lamenting of what we used to have, we don't have anymore. There's going to be massive upheaval and massive change. Now, verse 7, is this your joyous city whose antiquity is of ancient days? Her own feet shall carry her afar off to sojourn. Who hath taken this counsel against Tyre, the crowning city, whose merchants are princes, whose traffickers are the honorable of the earth? Remember, we talked about how these merchants became so known and were so vital to the success of the economy that they are known as the great ones of the earth. So that's what they're talking about here in verse 8. So what's going to become of the wealthy and the proud, basically? Like the people of Tyre, it's going to fall apart. They are the friends of Israel who, so Tyre is the friends of Israel who brought cedar and craftsmen to build Solomon's temple. And they're going to be gone. It'll be destroyed. Nothing will be there. Verse 9, the Lord of hosts hath purposed it, to stain the pride of all glory and to bring into contempt all the honorable of the earth. So the point of destroying these economics, the people who are getting wealthy at the expense of everybody else, you think of that Master Mahan principle, they will be destroyed. Why? Because God wants to humble the people. He wants to bring down pride. He wants to help them realize that what they have, that things aren't more important than people. And that's what he's going to do, basically, and that's the point of it. This is obviously something that we will be experiencing in our day and age, and it I don't think it is right now, but I think it sure feels kind of close. I mean, the global economy is literally floating on paper right now. It's not really stable at all. It's getting worse. So at some point we'll be experiencing these kinds of things too. It's all going to fall apart. And so it's important for us, of course, to not only be prepared for if a major thing happens, whether it's a wars, natural disasters, pestilences, or things like that, doesn't matter. Being prepared is a good idea. More importantly, knowing how to work with God, how to have Him in our life, how to learn from Him, how to use the Spirit to guide us is going to be even more important. So verse 10, pass through thy land as a river, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no more strength. So there's nothing there. Just pass through, just like a river, just runs right through, doesn't deal with anything, just keeps moving. Tarshish is going to be gone. Verse 11, he stretched out his hand over the sea. He shook the kingdoms. The Lord hath given a commandment against the merchant city to destroy the strongholds thereof. And he said, thou shalt no more rejoice, O thou oppressed virgin, daughter of Zidon. Arise, pass over to Chittim. There also shalt thou have no rest. So you can try to keep the old ways moving, but it's not going to work. Verse 13, behold the land of the Chaldeans. This is actually Babylon, is the Chaldeans. This people was not, till the Assyrian founded it for them that dwell in the wilderness. They set up the towers thereof, they raised up the palaces thereof, and he brought it to ruin. So the land of Chaldeans is the area where Babylon comes from. Sometimes we talk about the Chaldeans, that they're Babylon. Assyria, when you study this in history, it's really fascinating. So Babylon is just as old, if not older, than Assyria, but it was a small little area. We would put it on eastern Iraq, almost western to central Iran type area, and it was a small little nation. And Assyria came in and took them over, but they had a lot of royalty. They had a lot of descendancy from the more Sumerian and Akkadian groups as well. And so they were seen as very ancient. And the Babylonians were a hard group to deal with for Assyria. In fact, Assyria tried to marry princes and princesses together to kind of merge the two kingdoms into each other. And Babylon just wouldn't have it. Basically, they wanted their national identity. They wouldn't have it any other way. And it never really worked out. And then when they partnered up with the Persians, the Medes, which were their neighbors, they just took out Assyria, basically. It fell quick. Verse 14, howl ye ships of Tarshish, for your strength is laid waste. And it shall come to pass in that day and so usually when it says in that day, oftentimes there's a latter day prophecy with this. But this is talking about Tyre specifically. But again, metaphorically, we're talking about the destruction. What are the types and shadows? What are the indicators to look for in our day to understand the destruction of the wicked? So verse 15, it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre shall be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. After the end of 70 years shall Tyre sing as an harlot. So let's unpack this chapter or this verse for a second here. So interesting, 70 years happens to be the same time frame that Israel was in captivity in Babylon, and then they were let go after that. So like Babylon, Tyre represented the world so eventually, let me start this over. This is from the Old Testament Study Manual. Like Babylon, Tyre represented the world and so eventually would come under the judgments of God. Like Babylon, she was seen as a harlot committing fornication, meaning joining in wickedness. And remember, the idea of adultery also was a similar form of word for idolatry. They meant the same thing. You're cheating on the person you shouldn't cheat on. One is your physical spouse, the other is God, your spiritual relationship. Let's see. They were seen as a harlot committing fornication with the kingdoms of the world. The 70 years may refer to her coming judgments. Isaiah 23:18 shows that eventually the merchandise of Tyre, the world, will be put to proper use in building the kingdom of Jehovah. So pretty interesting that we have that there. It's going to be destroyed. It's going to be, and this is the wickedness of the world. Economics is going to completely collapse at some point. We can, if you study economics and understand even just U.S. economic structure, we don't even deal with money anymore. I mean, we have things like cash, but honestly, it's not worth that much. It's with inflation and with everything else, it's not worth much in reality. So uh, we have been on the verge and will probably continue to be on the verge of economic complete collapse for a while. It's just crazy how the economy has worked out. It's not going to take much to knock it down and turn it, the house of cards will fall down at some point. When that is, don't fully know when that's going to happen, but it's coming. So verse 16, take and harp, go about the city, thou harlot that has been forgotten. Make sweet melody, sing many songs that thou mayest be remembered. So again, they're going, man, we had a raucous time. We had crazy time doing what we wanted to do. And it has all fallen apart and all collapsed. And now I'm stuck remembering the past, remembering what it used to be like. And I'm not thinking forward. I'm not, I'm still stuck in the past, is what's going on basically. So verse 17, and it shall come to pass after the end of 70 years that the Lord will visit Tyre, and she shall turn to her hire, and shall commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. So this is, again, going to this idea of the world will, after the collapse, the world is going to try to revive itself using the traditional ways of doing things, and it's not going to work, basically. So they will all be destroyed, but come back and get wicked again. Fornication is no loyalty. Sell themselves and worry about themselves only. That's this idea. It's going to collapse. So you think of Tyre as a woman who was wealthy, a wealthy woman, lots of commerce. She was well loved by people, well known, and then economic disaster happens. So what does she do? She sells herself. She becomes a prostitute, a harlot, and sells herself. Hey, I need money. I'm willing to sacrifice anything and everything for money. And again, that's that worship of money that's in there. And then it gets bad, but then she starts to have more prosperity again through the wickedness, becomes prosperous, but it's not going to work. It's going to collapse, basically. So verse 18, and her merchandise and her hire shall be holiness to the Lord. It shall not be treasured nor laid up, for her merchandise shall be for them that dwell before the Lord, to eat sufficiently and for durable clothing, meaning covering the nakedness. So in the millennium, the wicked are destroyed. All that's destroyed, but eventually all these resources, all of this wealth that the world used to have, will start to culminate in a new economic structure that is building Zion, that is providing for people. And I like that it says in here, it shall not be treasured nor laid up. It's not going to be hoarded. Wealth is not for a few people to accumulate and then hold on to and not give out. That's part of the problem we have in the world today. Lots of people, lots of corporations become very wealthy and they hold on to their money to preserve themselves when they forget that if we all share, okay, this is the law of consecration, we all share, we either all collapse or we all rise. And we usually will all rise if we're willing to help each other out. And that's what we get to. So verse 18 is talking about eventually these resources will be used for good, not to rebuild the wicked nations, but to start a whole new economic structure, basically. So really fascinating as Isaiah 23 talks about, again, wickedness will be destroyed. Economic structure will be destroyed. All of it's going to go away. It's eventually going to just fall apart. Total economic collapse of all the world is what we have to look forward to at some point. Now, things will still move forward. Things will still happen. There will be semblances of some countries or nations. There will be people like mobs or gangs will grow up. Small groups will come together. They're going to there's always going to be somebody trying to build and grow and do, but it's going to get to a point where the wickedness can't be sustained and it's all going to fall apart. When that is, don't quite know for sure. This is part of the challenges with latter-day prophecy, is we get things like snapshots. Like Isaiah gives us a bunch of these little snapshots. Here's a bunch of things that are going to happen, but we don't know the order all the way. We know there's lots of wickedness and a lot of destruction that's going to happen before the millennium. Because you have to realize, in order for Christ to come again, in order for him to take over, there has to be a destruction of nations so that he can take over. If he walks into a world that is full of nations and goes, guess what? I'm here to take over. They don't want him to do that. So they all have to be destroyed. Wickedness has to be destroyed. And God is going to allow the wicked to destroy the wicked, basically, as he takes care of his righteous people. So be aware of that. Just think through that. But this is what we get in Isaiah 23 and Revelations 18 as well. So let's jump over to our next chapter to continue learning more.